like to introduce Anne, please, to start us off. Will you give her a round of applause? Thank you.
What it means to have dementia. It changes your whole life as a family. If you're not careful, it can actually stop your whole life as a family. And we need to change that.
You have to sometimes explain to people what dementia is, that it's not getting older and losing your memory. It's actually a disease, and it's classed as a terminal illness.
When we had our initial diagnosis, we had no support. We walked out of that surgery in total shell shock, and there was no way to turn, no place to turn, nobody who seemed to be able to help us or tell us what to do.
If there is no support, the wrong support or insufficient support, families can collapse. We know things happen. People are admitted into hospital or care homes as acute cases, which could be avoided if early support is available to them.
We need to raise awareness. People are willing to help, but they just don't know how to help and support people with dementia. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think it's ongoing. However, I think just the small changes that we can make all the difference.
Stigma is a huge issue in dementia, and support. And those are our two key issues that we absolutely have to tackle if we want to solve this problem. Even if we can make a dent that in a couple of years' time, families aren't afraid to come forward, our mission will have been accomplished. I wonder if anyone here saw the headline, "Stigma Prevents Treatment of Dementia," and how it described a young woman who had never heard of dementia, how she thought her mother was going mad and was afraid to leave her with the grandchildren. So in desperation, each morning when the young woman left for work, she tied Mary, her mother, to a beam with a long rope in a small shed next to her house, and left her there until she returned later that evening. This happened in Sri Lanka. Thankfully, here in Scotland, it would never happen. Well, we hope it wouldn't. We are one of the few countries in the world that have a dementia strategy, and it was launched in 2010. And when you read it, it's very clear that those at the top, the NHS, the Scottish Government, they know exactly what we need down here at grassroots. The problem is that it's not reaching us. And that's what we have to correct, and that's what that was all about. Unless we want our dementia families to be metaphorically tying people with dementia to those beams. The strategy is based around 5 concerns. And the first one is the fear of dementia, and how this deep fear is actually delaying people coming forward for a diagnosis. A man once said to me, "Ignorance is bliss." And I said to him, you're absolutely right. Ignorance is bliss. But there are 2 excellent reasons why staying in that blissful state is not such a good idea. First, while you're still able, you can tell your family what your wishes are. For example, my husband, who has vascular dementia, loves his photography and has told me in no uncertain terms never to stop him wandering down to the beach in fear that he might get lost or fall or worse. That it's his choice not to sit in front of a television ending his days there. And if he gets lost or hurts himself, and if doing that as part of being able to do his photography, then so be it. That's what he wants. And secondly, I told my ignorance is bliss man, with an early diagnosis, you can put your financial affairs in order. Again, while you're still able to do it. Because one thing you can be absolutely sure of, if you have a dementia diagnosis, the day will come when you can't do it anymore. This got his attention. The strategy's second concern is around information and support immediately after diagnosis. As I said on that film, we walked out of that consulting room 6 years ago and didn't know where to turn. And worse, my husband categorically refused to accept his diagnosis. So I was totally on my own. And 6 years later, I've realized that when you have an early diagnosis, which means usually that the person with dementia is nowhere near the crisis point or ready to go into a care home, it's imperative that the family caregiver be taught how the disease will progress, and that you're taught not to confront and not to contradict, and that you diffuse difficult situations, but above all else, you remember to look beyond the illness and see the man. He really is still there, but we have to be taught to do that. And doctors and CPNs and nurses really and truly need to know where to send those dementia families that need early help. And more importantly, tell them that they're going to need help and that they shouldn't feel guilty about asking for help before the crisis actually happens. The strategy's third concern is around general healthcare services and how they don't always understand how to respond to us. And my question is, why do professionals pussyfoot around with dementia? They don't do it with cancer or strokes or heart attacks. They tell it how it is. And as a caregiver, I'm just as guilty. I've learned not to contradict, I don't confront, I walk away from abusive behavior, and I try to diffuse difficult situations, simply probably because it makes my life easier at home. And while this can be seen to be best practice because it makes my husband feel good about himself, it could also be construed as bad practice, because not only does it do awful things to the caregiver's stress levels, it also reinforces the patient's own belief that there's nothing wrong with him, compounding the whole denial issue, which gets us right back to square one again. We have to change this. We have to get to the point where the stress levels in families are from the pain and anguish of supporting the loved one with dementia, rather than from the stress of living with someone who has an illness, but nobody wants to say it's an illness. Dementia is now the #1 fear of people over 55. Professionals call it as it is with cancer and heart and strokes. So why can't they be so honest about dementia? The fourth concern is about dignity and respect. Think of Mary in Sri Lanka, and your heart can break. How will this woman who's raised 7 children and even more grandchildren be feeling? Confused? Abandoned? Bewildered? Scared out of her wits? Do you suppose she wants to live like this? I doubt it. While we may not tie our Marys to beams in sheds, the betrayal of dignity and respect for dementia families is probably the single most important reason why there is fear of dementia, and why the stigma is so profound, and why denial of the illness on the part of patients and families is so prevalent. We have to get to the root of this indignity and disrespect and rip it from the heart of our society. And finally, the last concern about family members who care for people with dementia and how they don't always receive the help they need to protect their own welfare and to enable them to go on caring safely and effectively. Besides the fact that we feel too guilty to ask for help, right now the threshold for support is too high. Patients and caregivers generally have to be in crisis before support is forthcoming. And if we don't monitor and address the stress levels in these caregivers at an early stage, we'll have an unprecedented epidemic of stress-related disorders, with caregivers themselves needing medical attention. And then what will happen to our people with dementia? So how exactly can we get that national dementia strategy down to the people who need it? Is it lack of resources, and can existing resources be redirected to this? Is it poor communication? Do those in middle management understand just how important it is to get that strategy down to us? If not, who can show them? Do we need to change our local strategies, as bigger countries like India and China with their aging populations have been forced to do? If the heads of NHS and indeed the government keep pushing down from the top to change things, shouldn't we as citizens be pushing up from the bottom so that eventually we can meet somewhere in the middle? Imagine if every town and village in the Highlands did something at grassroots, like establishing dementia-friendly communities, to ensure the frail, the elderly, and dementia families are socially included in all community events. Or within 24 hours of diagnosis, someone knocked on your door and said, "I'm here for you." Or having our professionals, the GPs, the CPNs, the nurses, accepting that dementia is an illness and not being afraid to say so. So that every person with dementia can venture out, safe in the knowledge they'll be accepted with dignity and respect as part and parcel of their community. And imagine if every town and village had a lay worker program that not only red flagged early signs of dementia and caregiver stress, but actually did something about it. We're starting to do all of this in Sutherland. With a group of like-minded people, we're slowly turning our rural county from one with little dementia support in those first early days to one that's a model of excellence and can be used as a beacon for others to follow. There's been a lot of media hype about allowing people to die with dignity. Today I'm asking you to let families live with dignity so that no one can ever metaphorically tie us to those concrete beams in sheds. Thank you.
Thank you. Very powerful. Come and sit down now. Come and sit down. Thank you so much. Well.